The rain hammered against the packhouse windows as Isla stood in the corner of the great hall, watching the monthly mating ceremony with the same hollow feeling she experienced every time. 23 years old, and still unmated, still unwanted, still the shame of the Silverpine pack. The other unmated wolves circled each other with interest, their eyes glowing as they scented potential matches. But no one even glanced in her direction anymore. They had learned years ago that Isla was defective, broken, a wolf without a wolf. Her inner beast had never emerged, not even during her first shift attempt at 13, when every other werewolf experienced their transformation. The pack healers had examined her countless times, prodding and testing, only to declare her an anomaly, a wolfless omega destined for a life of servitude and pity. Her brother Marcus, the current alpha of Silverpine, stood on the raised platform with his mate Caroline, both of them radiating power and contempt as they surveyed the gathering. Marcus had made it abundantly clear throughout Isla's life that she was an embarrassment to his bloodline, a stain on their family's reputation. Their parents had died in a rogue attack when Isla was only 7, and Marcus had reluctantly taken responsibility for his younger sister, though he treated her more like an unwanted servant than family. He assigned her the most degrading tasks in the pack house, ensured she ate after everyone else, and forbade her from attending important pack functions unless her presence was absolutely required. Tonight was one of those mandatory nights, as tradition dictated that all unmated wolves of age must attend the ceremony, even the defective ones who would inevitably stand alone, while others found their happiness. Isla wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ignore the whispers that always followed her like shadows. The thin dress she wore, a hand-me-down from Caroline that had been altered to fit her, smaller frame, did little to ward off the chill that seemed to penetrate her bones. She had long ago stopped hoping that her wolf would suddenly emerge, stopped dreaming that someone might look at her with anything other than disdain or pity. Survival had become her only goal, getting through each day without drawing too much negative attention, completing her tasks efficiently enough to avoid punishment, and guarding the small secret part of her heart that still believed she was worth something despite what everyone else said. The ceremony proceeded with its usual rhythm until Marcus raised his hand for silence, his expression shifting into something Isla recognized as his political face, the one he wore when dealing with wolves more powerful than himself. The great doors of the hall opened, and a wave of pure alpha power rolled through the room like thunder, forcing every wolf present to their knees in instinctive submission. Everyone except Isla, who remained standing not out of defiance, but because she felt the pressure differently, as though it passed through her rather than crushing down on her. She quickly dropped to her knees anyway, not wanting to draw attention to yet another way she was different from normal wolves. Alpha King Kieran Stormclaw entered the hall with 4 of his elite guards, and even kneeling with her eyes lowered, Isla could feel the shift in the room's energy. Kieran was a legend throughout all the packs, the youngest wolf ever to unite the fractured kingdoms under one rule, a warrior who had never lost a battle, and a leader whose intelligence was said to match his strength. He was also notoriously unmated at 30 years old, having rejected dozens of suitable she-wolves presented to him by hopeful alphas trying to forge alliances through marriage. Rumors swirled about his reasons. Some said he was waiting for his true mate. Others whispered that he was incapable of love, too cold and calculating to ever bond with anyone. Marcus rose and approached Kieran with elaborate shows of respect, clearly thrilled to have such a powerful visitor. Isla knew her brother had been trying for months to secure a meeting with the Alpha King, hoping to discuss trade agreements that would benefit Silverpine. She kept her head down as the 2 alphas engaged in formal greetings, praying that the ceremony would end quickly so she could retreat to her small room in the servants' quarters and escape the suffocating atmosphere of forced celebration and her own inadequacy. But then something unexpected happened. The conversation between Marcus and Kieran died mid-sentence, and an unnatural silence fell over the hall. Isla felt the weight of attention shifting toward her, hundreds of eyes suddenly focusing on her kneeling form in the corner. Her heart began to race with a familiar panic, wondering what she had done wrong this time, what rule she had inadvertently broken that would result in public humiliation. Kieran's voice cut through the silence, deep and commanding with an edge that brooked no argument. Your name. The Omega in the corner. What is your name? It was not a question, but a demand, and Isla's throat constricted with fear as she realized the Alpha King was speaking directly to her. She forced herself to look up, meeting the most intense silver eyes she had ever seen. Kieran was staring at her with an expression she could not decipher, something between shock and triumph and hunger, and the force of his gaze made her feel like he was seeing straight through to her soul. "Isla," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the confused murmuring that had erupted throughout the hall. Isla Thornwood, Alpha King. Marcus looked absolutely bewildered, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and calculating interest as he tried to understand why the most powerful alpha in all the kingdoms was focused on his worthless sister. Caroline's expression was pure outrage, her carefully maintained composure cracking as she processed the impossible scene unfolding before her. Kieran moved toward Isla with the fluid grace of an apex predator, and every instinct she did not know she possessed screamed at her to run. But her body remained frozen in place. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could smell cedar and midnight rain, and something wild that made her head spin. His hand reached out, and she flinched instinctively, expecting a blow because that was what she had learned to expect from powerful wolves. But instead, his fingers gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to maintain eye contact, and the moment his skin touched hers, electricity sparked between them so intensely that several wolves gasped in recognition. The mate bond. Impossible. Undeniable. Blazing to life between the most powerful alpha in the world and the weakest, most worthless omega in Silverpine. Isla's mind reeled, unable to process what was happening, certain that this must be some kind of cruel joke or hallucination brought on by too many nights of poor sleep and insufficient food. But Kieran's expression remained deadly serious as he announced to the entire hall, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority that none could question. "This Omega is my true mate, blessed by the moon goddess herself. I claim her as my Luna Queen, and any who dispute this will answer to me personally." The explosion of reactions was immediate and chaotic. Marcus stepped forward, stammering attempts to understand, to verify, to somehow turn this unexpected development to his advantage. Caroline shrieked about the impossibility, the insult, the mistake, because how could a wolfless nothing be chosen over her own beautiful, talented daughter who had been groomed specifically for the possibility of catching the Alpha King's attention? The other pack members erupted into frantic whispers, their shock and disbelief palpable as they struggled to reconcile what they knew about Isla with the reality of what they were witnessing. Isla herself felt like she was drowning, her mind fragmenting under the weight of too many emotions. Terror that this was real, that her life was about to change in ways she could not control. Desperate hope that maybe, somehow, she was not as worthless as everyone had always told her. Confusion about why the moon goddess would pair her with someone so far above her station. And underneath it all, a strange rightness that hummed through her bones when Kieran's hand remained on her skin, as though her body recognized something her mind could not yet accept. Kieran did not wait for the chaos to settle. He simply lifted Isla to her feet with effortless strength and addressed Marcus with icy politeness. "I will be taking my mate to the royal territory immediately. You will prepare her belongings, though I suspect she has little that is worth bringing. Any mistreatment she has suffered under your leadership will be addressed in due time. For now, I suggest you remember that she is no longer a member of your pack, but the future Luna, queen of all territories, and any disrespect shown to her will be considered an act of war against the crown." The threat was clear and absolute, and Marcus's face went pale as he realized the precarious position he now occupied. He began stuttering assurances of Isla's good treatment, lies so transparent that several pack members shifted uncomfortably, knowing that everyone present was aware of how badly she had been treated. Kieran ignored the pathetic display and turned his full attention to Isla, his expression softening almost imperceptibly as he studied her frightened face. "I know this is overwhelming," he said, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear over the continued uproar in the hall. I know you have no reason to trust me or this bond, but I swear to you on my honor as Alpha King that you are safe now, that no one will ever harm you again, and that I will spend as long as it takes, earning the right to stand beside you. This was never how I imagined finding my mate, but the moon goddess has her reasons, and I have learned to trust her wisdom even when I do not immediately understand it. Before Isla could formulate any kind of response, Kieran swept her into his arms and strode toward the exit, his guards immediately forming a protective formation around them. She caught one last glimpse of Marcus's furious face, Caroline's twisted expression of jealousy, and the sea of shocked pack members before the doors closed behind them, and she was carried out into the rain-soaked night. A sleek black vehicle waited outside, far more luxurious than anything she had ever seen, and Kieran settled her gently into the leather seats before climbing in beside her. The drive to the royal territory took 3 hours, and Isla spent most of it in stunned silence, trying to process the fact that her entire existence had been upended in a matter of minutes. Kieran did not push her to speak, seeming content to simply watch her with those penetrating silver eyes, occasionally answering his phone to issue crisp commands about preparations for her arrival. She caught fragments of conversations about preparing the Luna suite, arranging for a complete wardrobe, scheduling meetings with the royal healers, and ensuring that all pack protocols regarding the new Luna were immediately implemented. As they crossed into royal territory, Isla felt a strange tingling sensation wash over her skin, as though the land itself was acknowledging her presence. The royal pack house came into view, and calling it a pack house was a grave understatement. It was a palace, a sprawling estate of white stone and soaring towers that glowed softly under the moonlight, surrounded by ancient forests and gardens that even in darkness radiated an otherworldly beauty. Isla had never imagined such a place could exist outside of fairy tales, and the reality of what her life had just become crashed over her with renewed force. Kieran helped her from the vehicle with careful courtesy, as though she were something precious that might break if handled roughly. A woman who introduced herself as Elena, the head of household staff, greeted them at the entrance with a warm smile that actually seemed genuine, rather than the pitying grimaces Isla was accustomed to. Elena launched into explanations about the suite that had been prepared, the schedule for tomorrow that would include meetings with various advisors and staff, and the protocols Isla would need to learn. But Kieran cut her off gently. "Tomorrow, Elena. Tonight my mate needs rest and space to adjust. Please ensure she has everything she requires and that no one disturbs her unless she specifically requests assistance." Elena nodded understandingly and led Isla through corridors so beautiful they made her chest ache, up a grand staircase, and into a suite of rooms that was larger than the entire servants' quarters back at Silver Pine. The Luna suite was decorated in shades of silver and deep blue, with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum and windows that overlooked the moonlit gardens. Elena showed her the bedroom, the private bathroom with a tub large enough to swim in, the sitting room, and the walk-in closet that was already filled with clothes in her size, though how they had managed that so quickly was beyond her understanding. After ensuring Isla knew how to summon assistance if needed, Elna left her, alone with a gentle reminder that she was safe here, and that everyone in the royal household was honored to serve their new Luna. Isla stood in the center of the bedroom, trembling slightly as the adrenaline that had carried her through the evening began to fade. She caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror and barely recognized the frightened girl staring back at her. The hand-me-down dress looked even more pathetic in these luxurious surroundings. Her hair was a tangled mess from the hall rain, and her face was pale with shock and exhaustion. She looked exactly like what she was, a worthless Omega who had somehow stumbled into a life she had no business living, and the weight of her own inadequacy threatened to crush her. A soft knock on the door made her jump, and Kieran's voice came through. "May I come in, Isla? I will not enter without your permission." The fact that he was asking, that he was giving her any choice at all, was so foreign to her experience that it took her a moment to find her voice. "Yes," she said quietly, and the door opened to reveal Kieran, who had changed from his formal attire into simple dark pants and a shirt that somehow made him look even more intimidating, because it emphasized the raw power of his frame. He closed the door behind him, but did not approach, instead leaning against the wall near the entrance, as though trying to appear less threatening. "I am sure you have 1,000 questions," he said, his silver eyes never leaving her face. "And I will answer all of them truthfully. But first, I need you to understand something important. This bond between us is real, blessed by the moon goddess, and it is not a mistake no matter what you have been told about yourself. However, I will not force you into anything you are not ready for. You are my mate, and that means I will protect you, provide for you, and respect your autonomy, even when my instincts scream at me to claim you immediately." Isla's hands twisted together nervously as she tried to formulate the question that mattered most. "Why me?" she whispered. "I am nothing, no one, a defective omega without even a wolf. You could have any she-wolf in the kingdoms, powerful ones, beautiful ones, wolves who actually deserve to stand beside an alpha king. Why would the moon goddess pair you with someone like me? There has to be a mistake." Kieran's expression hardened, anger flashing in his eyes, though she instinctively knew it was not directed at her. "The mistake, Isla, is that you have been taught to believe those lies about yourself. You are not defective, you are not worthless, and you sure as hell are not nothing. I have existed for 30 years waiting for my true mate, and the moment I walked into that hall tonight, I knew with absolute certainty that you are exactly who I have been waiting for. The mate bond does not lie, and the moon goddess does not make mistakes. But I do not even have a wolf," Isla protested, tears beginning to stream down her face as years of accumulated pain and rejection poured out. "I have tried everything, done everything the healers suggested, and nothing has ever worked. How can I be a Luna Queen when I cannot even shift, when I cannot protect anyone, or contribute anything meaningful to a pack? I will only bring you shame and weakness." Kieran moved then, crossing the room in 3 long strides and gently grasping her shoulders, forcing her to look up at him. "Listen to me very carefully, because I will only say this. Once, you are my mate, which makes you the strongest she-wolf in all the kingdoms regardless of whether you can shift or not. Your worth is not determined by your wolf or lack thereof. It is determined by who you are as a person, and from what I have observed and what I have learned about you, you possess more strength and resilience than wolves twice your size who have never known a day of true hardship. You survived years of abuse and neglect, and you are still standing here, still fighting, still hoping despite everything. That is real power, Isla. That is what makes you worthy of being Luna Queen." His words struck something deep inside her, a tiny seed of possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was not as broken as she had always believed. But doubt and fear were hard to overcome after a lifetime of reinforcement. "How did you know?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "How did you know I was your mate the moment you saw me? Did you feel the bond too?" Kieran's hands slid from her shoulders to gently cup her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "The moment I entered that hall, I felt a pull unlike anything I have ever experienced, as though every cell in my body was screaming that my mate was near. When I saw you kneeling in that corner, looking so small and frightened and alone, the bond snapped into place with a force that nearly brought me to my knees. And I also felt fury, absolute rage at the fact that my mate had been treated so poorly, hidden away like something shameful when you should have been cherished and protected. I wanted to tear that entire pack apart for what they did to you, and the only thing that stopped me was the need to get you somewhere safe first." The intensity of his words, the raw emotion in his voice, overwhelmed Isla's ability to maintain her composure. She broke down completely, sobbing against Kieran's chest as he pulled her into his arms and held her with a gentleness that contradicted his fearsome reputation. He murmured soothing words in a language she did not recognize, ancient and lyrical, while his hand stroked her hair and his presence surrounded her like a shield against all the pain she had endured. When her tears finally subsided into hiccuping breaths, Kieran guided her to sit on the edge of the enormous bed and knelt before her so they were at eye level. "I need to tell you something," he said, his expression serious and conflicted. And I need you to hear all of it before you make any judgments. Isla nodded, her heart rate picking up again as she sensed that whatever he was about to reveal was important and potentially devastating. When I united the kingdoms 10 years ago, I inherited a government system that was deeply flawed and oppressive, particularly toward Omegas. Laws that treated them as property, denied them basic rights, and enforced a hierarchy that benefited alphas at the expense of everyone else. I have been working since I took power to reform these laws, to create a more equitable society where rank does not determine worth. But change of this magnitude does not happen overnight. And I have faced fierce resistance from conservative factions who believe the old ways are sacred and should never be altered. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts before continuing. 6 months ago, my council informed me that if I wanted to continue pushing for Omega rights reforms, I needed to take a mate to stabilize my rule and produce an heir. They presented me with dozens of high-ranking she-wolves, all of them from powerful families, all of them perfectly positioned to help me navigate the political landscape. But I refused every single one because none of them were my true mate, and I swore I would never settle for a political arrangement when the moon goddess had someone specifically chosen for me. Isla listened with growing understanding and a creeping sense of dread about where this explanation was heading. Kieran's silver eyes held hers with unflinching honesty as he continued. Then, 2 months ago, I received intelligence from one of my spies embedded in various packs. The report mentioned a wolfless Omega in Silverpine who was being severely mistreated, hidden away despite being the sister of the current alpha. Something about the description called to me, an instinct I could not explain, and I decided to visit Silverpine under the guise of trade negotiations to see for myself. The truth hit Isla, like a physical blow. "You knew," she whispered, her voice hollow with betrayal. "You knew about me before tonight. You came to Silverpine specifically looking for me. This was not some spontaneous mate bond revelation. You planned this entire thing." The hurt and anger rising in her chest made it hard to breathe. Made her want to run from this beautiful room and this complicated male who had just shattered the one pure thing she thought she had found. Kieran did not flinch from her accusation. Did not try to soften the truth or make excuses. "Yes, I suspected you might be my mate based on the pull I felt even from the intelligence reports. But Isla, I need you to understand that I could not know for certain until I was in your presence. The mate bond cannot be predicted or manufactured. It simply is, or it is not. When I walked into that hall tonight and felt the bond snap into place, that was real and genuine, not something I orchestrated or forced. My suspicions were confirmed, but the bond itself was a gift from the moon goddess, not a manipulation on my part. But you let me think it was spontaneous," Isla said, tears streaming down her face again as she processed this new information. "You let me believe that somehow, miraculously, I was chosen despite being worthless. You made me hope that maybe the moon goddess saw value in me that no one else did. But really, you just needed a Omega mate who would seem weak and controllable to your council. Someone who would not threaten your political plans. I am not your blessed mate. I am your convenient solution." Kieran's face contorted with pain, and he reached for her hands, but she pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself defensively. "You are absolutely wrong," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, I suspected you might be my mate. And yes, part of me recognized that an Omega mate would actually strengthen my political position for the reforms I want to make, proving that Omegas deserve respect and power. But, Isla, I swear to you on everything I hold sacred that the mate bond is real, that my feelings for you are real, and that I would have claimed you even if it cost me my throne. The moon goddess chose us for each other, and while I may have sought you out based on incomplete information, what I found was so much more than I ever imagined. Isla wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that there was something genuine beneath the political maneuvering. But the betrayal felt too fresh and too similar to all the other times she had been used and discarded by people who claimed to care about her. "I need you to leave," she said quietly, her voice shaking but determined. "I need time to think." To process all of this without you standing here confusing everything with the mate bond and your pretty words. Please, just go." The request clearly cost Kieran something significant, his alpha instincts warring with his promise to respect her autonomy. For a long moment, Isla thought he might refuse, might insist on staying to explain further, or convince her to forgive him. But instead, he rose slowly, his expression a mask of carefully controlled pain. "As you wish," he said formally, "but know that I will be right outside this door for the remainder of the night. If you need anything at all, you only have to call for me, and I will be there immediately. And Isla, I truly am sorry for hurting you. That was never my intention. And I will spend as long as necessary proving to you that you are more than a political convenience to me." He left, closing the door quietly behind him, and Isla collapsed onto the bed, her mind spinning with conflicting emotions and impossible questions. She had gone from being the most rejected Omega in Silverpine to the chosen mate of the Alpha King in a matter of hours, only to discover that even this miraculous turn of events was tainted by political strategy and manipulation. Part of her recognized that Kieran had been honest with her when he could have easily hidden the truth, that he had respected her request for space even though it clearly pained him. But another part of her, the part that had been hurt and betrayed too many times, wondered if she could ever truly trust someone who had sought her out for reasons that extended beyond the pure mate bond she had desperately wanted to believe in. Sleep came in fitful waves, plagued by dreams of silver eyes and ancient magic, and a voice that whispered she was meant for more than she could imagine. When dawn broke through the windows, Isla woke feeling exhausted, but also strangely determined. She might not understand everything that was happening to her, might not know if she could trust Kieran, or if the mate bond was enough to build a life on. But she was tired of being a victim of circumstances beyond her control. If she was going to be Luna Queen, if she was going to navigate this new world she had been thrust into, she needed to find her own strength, rather than relying solely on her mate's protection. Elena arrived with breakfast and a warm smile, informing Isla that her schedule included meetings with the royal healers, the head Omega advocate, and several other advisors who would help her understand her new role. Kieran had requested to join her for dinner if she was willing, but he had made it clear that the choice was entirely hers, and he would not push if she needed more time. Isla agreed to the dinner, recognizing that they needed to talk more and that avoiding him indefinitely would solve nothing. The morning meetings were overwhelming but also strangely enlightening. The royal healers examined her gently and thoroughly, and their head healer, an ancient Omega named Thalia, sat with Isla afterward with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Your wolf is not absent, child," Thalia said, her eyes glowing with knowledge earned over centuries of life. "It is hidden, protected by magic so old and powerful that I have only read about it in texts I thought were legends. You carry a bloodline that was believed extinct, and your wolf is waiting for the right moment to emerge, when you are safe enough and strong enough to handle the truth of what you are." The revelation should have comforted Isla, should have answered the questions that had plagued her entire life, but instead it raised 100 new ones. "What bloodline?" she asked, her heart racing with a mixture of hope and fear. "What am I really? And why was my wolf hidden in the first place?" Thalia's expression turned grave as she explained that there were forces, even within the royal court, who would not welcome the return of certain ancient powers, that Isla needed to be cautious about who she trusted and what she revealed. The healer promised to research further and provide more information as it became safe to do so, but warned Isla that her awakening, when it came, would change everything. The meeting with Lyra, the head Omega advocate, proved equally enlightening in different ways. Lyra was a fierce Omega in her 40s who had fought tirelessly for Omega rights, and who looked at Isla with hope and determination. "You are exactly what this kingdom needs," Lyra said earnestly. "An Omega Luna Queen who understands the struggles our kind faces, who can be a voice for the voiceless, and push for the reforms that Alpha King Kieran has been fighting for. I know you did not choose this role, and I know you must be terrified, but please consider the opportunity you have been given to make real change for thousands of Omegas who suffer under unjust laws and oppressive treatment. The weight of expectation was crushing, but also oddly empowering. For the first time in her life, Isla considered that maybe her suffering had not been meaningless, that maybe she could use her experiences to help others in similar situations. She spent the afternoon learning about the various Omega advocacy initiatives, the proposed legal reforms that faced opposition, and the stories of Omegas throughout the kingdom who dreamed of a better future. By the time evening arrived, Isla's perspective had shifted slightly. She was still hurt by Kieran's strategic approach to finding his mate, still uncertain about trusting him fully, but she was also beginning to understand that their bond might serve a purpose larger than just their personal happiness. Dinner with Kieran was arranged in a private dining room that was somehow both elegant and intimate, with a table set for two and soft candlelight that created an atmosphere of romance despite the tension between them. Kieran stood when she entered, his silver eyes searching her face for any indication of her emotional state. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, and there was such genuine admiration in his voice that Isla felt warmth spread through her chest, despite her lingering hurt. They sat, and servants brought course after course of food, more delicious than anything Isla had ever tasted, though she could barely focus on eating with Kieran's intense attention fixed on her. Finally, after the servants departed and they were alone, Kieran spoke. "I have thought all day about what I could say to make this right, what explanation or apology might ease the hurt I caused you. But the truth is that I made choices based on political necessity and personal instinct that resulted in you feeling manipulated and used. And there is no excuse that makes that acceptable. So instead of excuses, I want to offer you complete transparency going forward and a choice about how we proceed from here." Isla set down her fork and met his gaze steadily, drawing on the inner strength she had been cultivating all day. "I am listening," she said, proud that her voice did not waver. Kieran leaned forward, his expression serious and open. "The mate bond between us is real and undeniable, but I recognize that trust cannot be built on biology alone. I propose that we approach this as a partnership rather than a traditional mating. You will be Luna Queen in title and position, with all the rights and protections that entails. You will have your own quarters, your own schedule, and complete autonomy over your choices. I will not pressure you for intimacy or claim you as mine beyond what you willingly offer. Instead, I ask that you give me the opportunity to earn your trust through my actions, to prove that you are more to me than a political strategy." The offer was more than Isla had dared hope for, but she needed to push further, to test the boundaries of what he was truly willing to give. "And if I decide I cannot trust you?" she asked, her heart pounding. "If I conclude that this partnership will not work, what happens then? Will you force me to stay because of the mate bond and your political needs? Or will you grant me freedom even if it costs you?" Kieran's face showed the internal struggle her question caused him. But when he answered, his voice was firm and sincere. "If you truly wish to, leave. If you decide that you cannot build a life with me, I will not hold you against your will. It would destroy me, and my wolf would rage against the separation. But I meant what I said about respecting your autonomy. You are not my prisoner, Isla. You are my mate. And that means your happiness matters more to me than my own desires or political convenience." Something in Isla's chest loosened at his words, at the evidence that he was willing to sacrifice even the mate bond, if that was what she needed. She took a deep breath and made her decision. "I will stay," she said, watching his expression shift from tension to relief, "but on my terms. I want to be involved in the Omega advocacy work, to use my position to actually help others rather than just being a figurative Luna. I want honesty from you about all political matters that involve me. No more strategic omissions or manipulations, even if you think you are protecting me. And I want time to discover who I am outside of being someone's rejected sister or convenient mate. Can you agree to those terms?" Kieran's smile was radiant and genuine, transforming his usually stern face into something breathtakingly beautiful. "Every single one of those terms is not only acceptable, but admirable," he said. "You will have my full support in the advocacy work. Complete transparency about political matters. and all the time and space you need to become whoever you are meant to be. I ask only that you allow me to be present for your journey, to support you however I can, and to hope that eventually you might see me as more than the calculating alpha who sought you out for strategic reasons. They talked long into the night, and for the first time, Isla felt like she was seeing the real Kieran beneath the Alpha King facade. He told her about the loneliness of his position, the weight of responsibility for thousands of lives, and the dream he carried of creating a kingdom where every wolf, regardless of rank, could thrive and contribute according to their abilities, rather than their designation. He shared stories from his childhood, the loss of his parents to the same war that had fractured the kingdoms, and the oath he had sworn to build something better than the broken system he inherited. Isla found herself sharing too, opening up about the years of abuse and neglect, the crushing loneliness of being rejected by her own family, and the tiny flame of hope she had carried that someday, somehow, her life would have meaning beyond just surviving. If you had asked me for any of this, you know you do not have to ask if we can support each other, or if we can be honest with one another like we seem to be doing now. Then you might have something worth building here. The vulnerability of her admission made her feel exposed, but Kieran's expression was so tender and full of understanding that she did not regret the honesty. The following weeks established a pattern that slowly built genuine connection between them. Kieran kept his word about giving Isla space and autonomy, never pushing for more than she was ready to offer. But he was constantly present in supportive ways that made her feel valued rather than pressured. He attended Omega advocacy meetings with her, contributed ideas to reform proposals, and used his authority to push through changes that had been stalled for years by conservative opposition. Isla watched him navigate complex political situations with intelligence and integrity, saw how much he truly cared about making the kingdom better for everyone, and her respect for him grew alongside the tentative affection developing between them. Her own transformation was equally dramatic. With proper nutrition, safety, and support, Isla began to discover strength she never knew she possessed. She had a natural gift for connecting with other Omegas, understanding their struggles and articulating solutions that resonated with their lived experiences. Her insights proved invaluable in crafting legislation that actually addressed real problems rather than theoretical concerns. The royal court began to recognize her, not as the weak Omega they had expected, but as the intelligent, compassionate leader who brought a perspective their previous Lunas had lacked. But the most significant changes were happening beneath the surface. Literally. Isla began experiencing strange dreams, filled with silver light and ancient voices speaking in languages she should not understand, but somehow did. She would wake with knowledge she had not possessed before, understanding of pack dynamics and magical theory that had never been taught to her. Thalia continued researching, growing increasingly certain that Isla's heritage was tied to the legendary lunar Omegas, but the healer counseled patience and caution, warning that forces opposed to such power would act if they suspected the truth. 3 months into her new life, the first real threat emerged, a conservative faction within the royal council, led by an elderly alpha named Matthias, who had opposed Kieran's reforms from the beginning, began spreading rumors that the Luna Queen was defective and that her inability to shift proved she was unworthy of her position. They demanded that Kieran set her aside and choose a proper mate from a powerful bloodline, framing their opposition as concern for the stability of the kingdom. The attacks were vicious and personal, dredging up every humiliation from Isla's past and presenting her as evidence that Omegas should never be elevated to positions of authority. Kieran's response was swift and merciless. He called a full assembly of the council and addressed the accusations publicly, his power radiating through the chamber in waves that left no doubt about his position. Luna Queen Isla is my true mate, blessed by the moon goddess and chosen by fate itself, he declared, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Any suggestion that she is unworthy is an insult, not only to her but to the divine wisdom that paired us. Her strength lies not in her ability to shift, but in her character, her intelligence, and her unwavering commitment to justice for all wolves regardless of rank. I will hear no more challenges to her position, and any council member who cannot accept my mate as their Luna is welcome to resign immediately." The display of support should have comforted Isla, but instead it triggered something unexpected. As Kieran defended her, as his power filled the room, something inside Isla responded with equal force. Light exploded from her body, silver and blindingly bright. And for the first time in her life, she felt her wolf surge forward, not in a traditional shift, but in a manifestation of pure magical energy. The entire council chamber was filled with lunar light, and when it faded, Isla stood transformed not into a regular wolf, but into something the oldest among them recognized from ancient texts and legends. "A lunar Omega," Thalia breathed, her voice filled with awe and vindication. "The bloodline lives. Return to us when we need it most." Isla felt her wolf fully present for the first time, not separate from her but integrated, a part of her consciousness that had been sleeping and protecting her until the moment was right. The wolf spoke to her in thoughts and feelings, explaining that the lunar Omegas had not been weak but immensely powerful. Their magic a threat to the rigid hierarchy established by dominant alphas centuries ago. They had been systematically hunted and eliminated, their history erased and rewritten to portray Omegas as lesser beings deserving of subjugation. But one bloodline had survived, hidden through generations of strategic intermarriage and magical concealment, waiting for a time when the world might be ready to accept the truth that power came in many forms, and that Omegas possessed magic as ancient and vital as any alpha strength. Isla was the first in 200 years to awaken fully, and her emergence was both a gift and a declaration that the old ways of oppression and hierarchy were ending. The impact on the kingdom was immediate and profound. Conservative factions that had opposed Omega rights could no longer claim Omegas were inherently weak when confronted with evidence of Isla's power. The manifestation of lunar magic became proof that the moon goddess valued all her children equally and had granted different gifts to different ranks for the balance and health of werewolf society. Reform legislation that had been stalled for years passed within weeks, as even the most resistant council members recognized that denying Omega rights was contrary to divine will. But not everyone celebrated the change. Matthias and his closest supporters saw Isla's power as a threat to everything they believed, and they began plotting in secret to eliminate her before she could fully master her abilities and shift the balance of power permanently. They reached out to old enemies of the Crown, rogue packs that thrived on chaos and violence, offering alliances in exchange for assistance in removing the lunar Omega Luna Queen. Kieran's intelligence network uncovered the plot before it could be fully executed, but not before an assassination attempt was made during a public ceremony celebrating new Omega rights legislation. Attackers struck from multiple directions, coordinated and well-trained, clearly expecting to overwhelm the royal guards and reach Isla before she could be protected. What they had not anticipated was that Isla was no longer the frightened, powerless Omega who had arrived at the palace months earlier. Her lunar magic erupted instinctively in response to the threat, creating a shield of silver light that repelled the attackers and gave the guards time to respond. But more than defense, Isla's power reached out and touched the minds of the attackers, showing them visions of a different future, a kingdom where strength was celebrated regardless of its source and where cooperation replaced domination. Several of the rogues dropped their weapons immediately, overwhelmed by the possibility of belonging to something better than the violent, chaotic existence they had known. The attempt failed spectacularly, and the investigation that followed revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. Matthias and 12 other high-ranking wolves had been working for months to undermine Kieran's rule and eliminate Isla, funded by old money from families that had profited under the previous oppressive system. The evidence was undeniable, and Kieran faced the difficult decision of how to handle such extensive betrayal from within his own government. Isla surprised everyone, including herself, by advocating for restorative justice rather than execution. These wolves acted out of fear and ignorance, she argued before the council, addressing not just Kieran, but all the assembled leaders. They were taught from birth that hierarchy and domination were the natural order, and they genuinely believed that change would destroy everything they valued. Killing them will only create martyrs and deepen the divisions we are trying to heal. Instead, let us show them a different path, prove through our actions that a more equitable kingdom is stronger and more prosperous than the oppressive system they are trying to preserve. Her proposal was radical and controversial, calling for the conspirators to be stripped of their positions and wealth, but given the opportunity to earn redemption through service to Omega communities, experiencing firsthand the struggles they had perpetuated. It was a risk, trusting that exposure to the reality of Omega lives might change hearts and minds that had been closed for generations. But Kieran supported her vision completely, recognizing that true lasting change required transformation of understanding rather than just punishment of wrongdoing. The following year proved Isla right in ways even she had not fully anticipated. Matthias, forced to live and work among Omegas he had previously considered beneath him, began to see the intelligence, strength, and resilience that thrived despite systematic oppression. His letters to the council, initially filled with resentment and resistance, gradually shifted to include observations about injustices he had never noticed before and suggestions for additional reforms. Other conspirators underwent similar transformations, not all and not quickly, but enough to demonstrate that redemption was possible even for those most entrenched in harmful ideologies. Isla's reputation grew far beyond the royal territory. Omegas from every pack in the kingdom began making pilgrimages to see their Luna Queen, to witness proof that their designation did not determine their destiny. Isla established programs to identify and nurture Omega talents, creating pathways for education and leadership that had never existed before. Young Omegas who had been told they were worthless began dreaming of futures where they could contribute meaningfully to their communities, where their voices mattered, and where their safety was protected by law rather than dependent on the mercy of more powerful wolves. Her relationship with Kieran deepened as they worked side by side to reshape the kingdom. The political partnership evolved into genuine friendship, and then into love that was all the more powerful because it was chosen rather than simply accepted as mate bond. Destiny. Isla came to understand that while Kieran's initial approach to finding her had been strategic, his feelings for her were absolutely real and had grown far beyond what the mate bond demanded. He supported her autonomy, even when it conflicted with his alpha instincts, celebrated her power even when it challenged his authority, and loved her not, despite her complicated past, but because of the strength and compassion that past had forged in her. The day Isla finally agreed to complete the mate bond was not marked by grand ceremony or public declaration, but by a private moment between them in the gardens where they often walked together. They had been discussing a particularly complex piece of legislation when Kieran made a comment that made Isla laugh, genuinely and freely, and she realized that somewhere along the way, she had stopped being afraid of him, stopped questioning whether he truly valued her. She looked at him in the fading sunlight, this powerful alpha who had turned his entire world upside down to find her, and who had proven through countless actions that she mattered more to him than politics or power, and she knew with absolute certainty that she wanted to build a life with him. "I am ready," she said simply, and Kieran understood immediately what she meant. His expression transformed into something so tender and full of joy that it took her breath away. "Are you certain?" he asked, always giving her the option to change her mind, to take more time, to maintain control over her own choices. "I have never been more certain of anything," she replied. And it was true. This was not desperation or obligation, but genuine desire to bind her life to his, to become partners in every sense of the word. Their mating was private and sacred, a joining of not just bodies, but souls. The mate bond, solidifying into something unbreakable and beautiful. Isla's lunar magic intertwined with Kieran's alpha power, creating a synergy that neither had possessed alone. A balance of strength and compassion that would guide their rule for decades to come. They emerged from that night truly united, partners who had chosen each other repeatedly through challenges and revelations and growth. The impact of their bond rippled through the kingdom in unexpected ways. Packs that had been resistant to change found themselves influenced by the undeniable rightness of their Alpha King and Luna Queen's partnership. The mate bond between an Alpha and a lunar Omega, blessed by the Moon Goddess, and forged through genuine respect and love, became a symbol of the new kingdom they were building. One where different kinds of strength were valued, and where every wolf had the opportunity to thrive according to their gifts, rather than being limited by their rank. 5 years after that fateful night when Kieran first walked into Silverpine's mating ceremony, Isla stood on the balcony of the royal palace, addressing a crowd of thousands who had gathered to celebrate the anniversary of the Omega Rights Reformation. She was no longer the frightened, rejected Omega, who had believed herself worthless. She was Luna Queen Isla Stormclaw, powerful lunar Omega, advocate for the voiceless, and beloved leader whose vision had transformed an entire kingdom. Beside her stood Kieran, her mate and partner, his hand resting supportively on her lower back as she spoke words that would be recorded in history texts for generations to come. We gather today not to celebrate what was given to us, but what we chose to build together, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the magical amplification her lunar power provided. 5 years ago, I was told I was worthless because I could not shift, that I was defective because my wolf had not emerged, that I deserved the abuse and neglect I suffered, because that was simply the natural order of things. Today, I stand before you as proof that what we are told about ourselves by systems designed to keep us powerless is a lie. Every Omega in this kingdom possesses value, possesses strength, possesses the right to live free from oppression and fear. The crowd erupted in cheers, thousands of voices raised in celebration and affirmation. Isla felt Kieran's pride and love through their bond, a constant warmth that anchored her even in moments of overwhelming emotion. She continued, her words carefully chosen to honor both how far they had come and how much work remained. But let us also acknowledge that transformation is ongoing, not complete. There are still packs that resist these changes, still wolves who cling to old hierarchies because change is frightening. Our task is not to punish them for their fear, but to prove through our actions that a kingdom built on justice and equity is stronger, safer, and more prosperous than one built on domination and oppression. She spoke of specific initiatives, new programs to support Omega education and leadership development, legal protections that had been strengthened, and economic opportunities that had lifted thousands of Omega families out of poverty and dependence. She acknowledged the council members and advocates who had worked tirelessly for reform, including several former conspirators who had genuinely transformed and now contributed meaningfully to Omega rights initiatives. She thanked Kieran publicly for his unwavering support and for being willing to challenge every tradition and expectation in service of creating something better. And as she looked out over the sea of hopeful faces, Omegas and Alphas and Betas all gathered together in genuine community rather than rigid hierarchy, Isla felt a peace she had never imagined possible. Her journey from rejected Omega to Luna Queen had been painful and complicated, marked by betrayal and manipulation as well as love and growth. But standing here now, seeing the tangible impact of her suffering transformed into purpose, she would not change any of it because every hardship had prepared her for exactly this moment, this role, this opportunity to be a voice for those who had been silenced too long. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and the kind of joy that comes from genuine progress rather than temporary distraction. Isla and Kieran eventually retreated to their private quarters, exhausted but content, and they stood together looking out over the moonlit kingdom they had reshaped through partnership and persistence. Kieran pulled Isla close, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on top of her head. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice soft with emotion, "for taking a chance on us, for choosing to stay when you had every reason to leave, for being brave enough to become who you were always meant to be." Isla turned in his embrace, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Thank you for finding me," she replied, her heart full of love for this complicated, powerful male who had seen value in her when she could not see it in herself, for respecting me enough to be honest even when the truth was painful, for supporting my growth even when it challenged your authority, for proving that true strength includes knowing when to yield and when to stand firm. We built something beautiful together, Kieran, and I would choose you again in every lifetime. Their kiss was tender and deep, a reaffirmation of bonds forged through fire and choice, and as they held each other in the moonlight, both knew that their story was far from over. There would be more challenges, more resistance to overcome, more growth required as they continued reshaping a kingdom according to values of justice and equity. But they would face it all together, Alpha and Omega, power and magic, strength and compassion combined into something greater than either could be alone. And in that moment, standing in each other's arms with the moon blessing them from above, they were not ruler and subject, not even just mates, but partners who had chosen each other across every obstacle and would continue choosing each other through whatever came next, proving that the most powerful force in any kingdom is not domination or hierarchy, but love freely given and trust, hard-earned.